understanding like language. There's kinesthetic. I can't remember all of them, but there's creativity, like how artistically talented you are. Like there's some guys who are just great at art with never practicing. There's also kinesthetic intelligence, kinesthetic awareness. There's some guys who just have like this advanced physical IQ, where maybe they can't figure out how to learn Spanish. Like, they're just terrible at it. But when it comes to understanding like a movement, they can just get it, no problem. I remember Matt Hughes saying that he said he was like this for grappling. He's like, because he's wrestled his whole life, he's had so much experience with grappling. When he got into jiu-jitsu, he would only have to see a move once and he has it, like no problem. Like he's like, okay, arm bar, switch over, and then he'd do. He's like, okay, I got it, and he'd go win a UFC fight with it in the next month.
Yeah.
And that kind of talks about like your example with Muay Thai, from baseball, rotational strength in the Muay Thai, where you have this frame of reference of all this like different kinesthetic awareness, this neuroplasticity on movements, and you can apply that to other things. And that's why, but that's where talent is starting to come from, is how your body can reference different movements and apply it. And I remember there's this one kid who played football at my high school. He was like really good football player. Give him a shout out, Marty Rehoviak. Now Marty, don't mean to put this guy on blast. Marty was so strong and fucking fast. This kid, he was like a sophomore playing on varsity, returning punts. He's running like a 4.7. He was like lightning. And he was also a bigger kid. He was way bigger than all of us. Like sophomore year, he was like a senior, in high school. Like he had like the biceps, and we're still like barely getting through our puberty cycle, right? And he already has like facial hair. And he never hit the weight room. He never liked to work out. He never liked to run drills. He was like, quote unquote, like a relatively lazy athlete. But he would just show up and just destroy. He would just destroy. He would pull off crazy movements. He would just show up to track and field, get a starting spot on the 4x1, no problem. You just join lacrosse and start, because he was such a good athlete. His nervous system was so dominant that he didn't need to do all this extra training to get him to this level. But with those guys, it's a gift and it's a curse. And there's a phrase, that attaches to that. Like hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's an archetype that we've known since the dawn of time. Like you've experienced it, I've experienced it. There's guys who are just so good out the box that they kind of become lazy because they don't go through the natural progression of defeat, getting better. A lot of the times it takes a really bad loss for you to never want to feel that pain again. So you double down and work your ass off to try to stack the odds in your favor. But if you're not used to losing, maybe you never really lose at all. You never go through that growth as an individual. And you kind of start to rely on your physical talents. Like Roy Jones Jr. is a picture perfect example of someone who never did shit, but showed up and just dominated. His neuromuscular dominance was just insane, but never really trained. He would play basketball like on days before his fights and not really hit mitts and show up and just like put on a clinic.
Yeah.
Right. But you got guys who do take it on. And this is where we're kind of getting to BJ Penn. You do have sometimes these talented athletes do wake the fuck up, usually from a devastating loss. And there was a loss BJ received to get his ass into shape again. Like Floyd Mayweather's a good example of high neuromuscular dominance and work ethic. And when those guys combine the two, they become unstoppable. They become legends. But they don't always like to keep it up. And if we look at this fight, if we kind of segue this into BJ, you can obviously see how BJ's performing. Like, look at his balance, look at his movement, his ability to throw the jab, his relaxation. If you look at Sean Shirk, you can kind of see a difference between someone who's done a lot of like weightlifting, a lot of high tension training, a lot of circuit training, pushing himself. And you got someone like BJ Penn, not a lot of training, really high neuromuscular dominance. And the guy who's working harder is just getting outclassed by a more efficient mover.
Yeah.
That's really the key element when it comes to becoming like a better athlete, is movement quality, force generation, not necessarily just strength and power. And Sean Shirk was a strength and power guy. He had crazy training camps. But Sean Shirk, he never really lived up to his potential because his body started to break down right into his prime years. Shoulders were shot, lower back was shot, training capacity fell apart, and he just burned himself out and he retired without ever really seeing what he was capable of, because sometimes, your body can only take so much. And and kind of going further into BJ Penn's journey is that, BJ Penn, he defeated Sean Shirk. He won the belt. And I believe after BJ Penn won the lightweight title, he wanted to be a double champ. He wanted to go up to welterweight and face Matt Hughes to beat Matt Hughes again for the welterweight title. And but Dana White would not give BJ Penn the title shot right off the bat. He said, like, listen, George St. Pierre has been in the contender mix forever. He's beating everyone. He's the next in line for the welterweight title. And George deserves this title shot because that's his division. You're coming up from a division asking for a title shot. So Dana White said, listen, we'll do this. You fight George St. Pierre. Whoever wins gets a title shot at Matt Hughes. Right? So BJ Penn goes up a weight class to fight George St. Pierre, and BJ Penn freaking gets destroyed. He just gets pummeled. And because now BJ Penn was facing another athlete with high neuromuscular dominance, not quite as good as BJ. I would say George is a great athlete, but naturally talented. BJ's on another level. BJ just has better reflexive control, better elastic quality. Just a better nervous system, in my opinion. But George also has smarter training methods. George never grounded himself down to powder. He had better striking protocol, better weightlifting protocol, better cardio overall, and better strategy. I believe when George St. Pierre and Firas Zahabi, when they were working together, they were unstoppable at TriStar. When BJ was working with Tom Perillo in Hawaii or at RVCA, they were doing really good stuff, but I don't think Tom Perillo is quite the strategist as a Firas Zahabi. I think Firas Zahabi, he's kind of a wizard, right now when it comes to fight IQ. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's one of the top guys.
Easily.
This kind of reminds me of a fight that just happened, the Sean O'Malley-Merab fight. It was the last pay-per-view, but Merab is kind of the Sean Shirk or the Georges St. Pierre. He's the more athletic, the more explosive, and he just grinded Sean O'Malley down. But I'm a Sean O'Malley fan. I'm kind of hoping that this is his version of BJ Penn getting beat up by GSP, where he has to reassess and come up with some new ways to go about it in the cage. Since Sean is like BJ Penn, he's just so athletic, so smooth, so precise, so relaxed in there. But I think the kryptonite for that is those cardio machines. Just the they just don't stop. They just don't get tired.
Well, Sean also, the thing is with Sean O'Malley, and Sean gets a ton of hate, which I don't think is necessarily fair. A lot of people think Sean O'Malley's like a UFC plant, like he's engineered to be the next Conor McGregor because the UFC is desperate for a superstar. I don't necessarily think that's exactly the case. Maybe Sean O'Malley has had some competition that's not quite up to par, but he's also faced really dangerous guys. You can't. I'm not a fan of saying that guys are getting fed easy fights, because you're in the UFC. Like, everyone's super fucking dangerous. That's super disrespectful and doesn't really line up with the reality of who these guys are. Yeah. I don't really think there's easy fights in the UFC. Like, everyone is super dangerous unless you're in the Contender Series. Then maybe, if you're going to have a world title holder like Sean O'Malley against a UFC contender with 2 fights, that's a huge mismatch.
Yeah,
but
I'd say any 2 fighters in the UFC in the same weight class are going to be much more similar than a UFC fighter versus a non-UFC fighter. Like, even the champ versus the newbie who just got off the Contender Series, there's not that big of a gap. That these guys are all pretty elite.
Yeah, well, they're all pretty elite, but I guess my point was to say, Sean O'Malley is another example of a guy with high neuromuscular dominance. It's very rare to have that kind of knockout power at his weight class. He's got good biomechanics. He's got really big hands, Sean O'Malley. I don't know if you ever looked at the size of his hands. His joints, he's a lot like Max Holloway. Mm-hmm. Very lean, but his joints are really thick. His knees are really thick. His wrists, his hands, his feet are really big. those kind of guys can generate a lot of power, and it's because they have a lot of weight in their bones. Their skeletal system is very dense. That creates a little extra mass. It ups the force of their striking just enough to create those knockout capabilities.
Yeah.
And but back to BJ, and you can see, like, as we're watching this fight now, you see how BJ. I really want you to look at BJ's footwork. I want you to look at his movement. Now, BJ right now, everyone's getting tired. BJ's tired, Sean Shirk is tired, but BJ is fighting a smarter fight. And you can see how Sean Shirk, you see how his punches, like, he really has to, oh, this is really bad. Where he just knees him into the wall. But go back like 60 seconds if we can. Just so we can kind of display some striking of the two. We can see, like, the two different muscle actions. Now, if you look at BJ's striking, he's very loose. He's very snappy. He really extends through his punch. His hands are relaxed. He just has good timing, has good accuracy. And if you look at Sean Shirk's striking, he doesn't land. Like, he really muscles his punch, and he tries to jump in and use his whole body into the punch. That destroys your force output, especially if you have really tight muscle systems. Your fascia is super restricted from years of weight training. It really degrades the accuracy and precision of your striking by inches. Maybe a half inch, a quarter inch, but that's a lot in a fight, being off by that much. Unlike BJ, does less training, a better nervous system, and he's just popping him with jabs. His strikes are landing. He's staying loose. He's staying fluid. He's doing damage. While Sean Shirk, he just looks like he's just trying to muscle every punch. Accuracy is breaking down. All that cardio and all that training doesn't always equate to better fighting. And this is what I'm always preaching this to guys. Like, listen, more muscle doesn't mean you're going to be a better striker. Like, stop focusing on becoming a better workout guy and focus on being a better martial artist.
Yeah.
You saw that punching series, nothing. He's hitting hands. Then you see BJ, he's tagging him. He can improvise movements, flying knees, speed, elasticity. It's just a clear example of how an advanced nervous system compared to a guy who has an overtrained nervous system trained in all